1st implementation date.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is parental alienation coursework for marriage and family therapists, clinical social workers, professional clinical counselors, and educational psychologists in regard to parent alienation. And Mr. Burglas, is that correct? Is going to give us a presentation. I'm sorry, I don't have your name on my agenda.
Dr. Lynn Steinberg. I'm here just to maybe a little bit.
Can you please speak into the microphone for us?
Hello, hello, hello.
Oh, it's not on. You'll
Not
need
on.
to push the button at the bottom with the green light is on.
We ask you this so
Thank
we
you.
can make sure it's on the record.
And is that better? It's Dr. Lynn Steinberg, and I'm here just to support Ron and answer any technical questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder, if you could speak into the microphones because we are webcammed live. And so Mr. Cesar over there can't, if he can't hear you, you might see him come right up in front of you and try to push the microphone down so that that those people who are watching can hear.
Thank you. Okay. My name is Ron Burglas. I'm head of the English department at Citrus Continuation High School in Fontana. I'm an adjunct professor of theater at San Bernardino Valley College, and I'm also an occasional broadcaster on KVCR TV in San Bernardino. Last March, I came before you to ask that you put on a future agenda my request that you alter the curriculum for trainee therapists, social workers, educational psychologists, and clinical counselors to include the study of parental alienation and its diagnostic indicators. Thank you for agreeing to see me today. Parental alienation is what happens to a child when one or other parent in a high-conflict divorce brainwashes the children into believing that they should sever their relationship with their other parent and their parent's entire family. Parental alienation is not junk science, but it has, in a few rare cases, been used by domestic abusers as a way of regaining custody of their children. This is because therapists have not been trained to recognize parental alienation and therefore make mistakes. Costly mistakes in terms of the children who are left in the hands of the alienating parent, who is psychologically, emotionally, and sometimes physically abusing them. One thing remains crystal clear and verified by countless peer-reviewed journals. For a child to want to discard a parent is completely counterintuitive and should be a red flag to any trained therapist. You really do have to teach a child to hate a parent. As Linda Gottlieb, LMFT, LCSW, has written, most professionals believe that if a child has rejected a parent, the parent must have done something to warrant it. Few people would even think of another explanation, namely that a child has been programmed or brainwashed, just like what occurs in a cult or in the well-known Stockholm Syndrome. But if one were to compare alienated children to foster children, specifically children who have been removed from their parents due to actual abuse and neglect, the difference would be obvious. Children who have truly been abused crave a relationship with their parents. Paradoxically, and this is what makes it so counterintuitive, with few exceptions, abused children protect their abusive parents. They do not disparage, attack, or reject them. Because they are so counterintuitive, many cases require a subspecialist to reliably rule in or rule out alienation. As a result of this dysfunctional relationship, alienated children lose their individuality, must suppress their natural feelings of love and need for a parent, and are manipulated to do the bidding of the alienating parent. That is extremely dangerous and damaging to the child. What I am asking you to do is to protect those children and all the children who have yet to become alienated due to the dysfunction and malevolence of an alienating parent. It happens so frequently that most everyone, while not knowing the words parental alienation, will acknowledge that they have heard of it and maybe even experienced it, meaning that it has become so common in our society that it is now an accepted byproduct of high conflict divorce. In fact, by refusing to take action, we are facilitating the destruction of our children's right to love both parents equally and without guilt. And this problem has become so acute that unless we begin the process of training those who are directly responsible for the welfare of our children to understand and recognize the parental alienation diagnostic indicators, we will be consigning our children to a lifetime of trauma, suffering, guilt, and the loss of a loving, attentive, and blameless parent. That is why I am asking you to include the study of parental alienation and its diagnostic indicators in the 7-hour course on child abuse that all licensees are required to take and labeled for what it is: child psychological and emotional abuse. As Jerry Grossman so eloquently put it in his letter to you, given that at least 7 hours of training in child abuse assessment and reporting is required coursework for mental health professionals under the jurisdiction of the BBS, California Code of Regulations, Section 1807.2, and that parental alienation can lead a child to experience either emotional abuse or unjustifiable mental suffering, it would be important that parental alienation be a topic to be addressed in this training, as it could constitute a mandated reporting responsibility on the part of a mental health professional. Please understand that I am not asking for yet another course to be added to the already crowded and expensive schedule of classes trainees are required to take, nor am I asking for courses already well established to be supplanted by the study of parental alienation. But I am asking you to accept that parental alienation is child psychological abuse, and that, as mandated reporters, therapists be required, upon accurately assessing and diagnosing it, to report it as such to Child Protective Services. I am also requesting that continuing education units on parental alienation be added to the list of courses therapists may take as part of their mandatory 36 hours of professional development prior to having their licenses renewed every 2 years. Again, I am not asking to make it a requirement, but rather that it be made available. Let me be quite specific about the kind of alienation to which I am referring. I am not talking about one parent speaking badly about a parent to a child in the middle of a divorce. Things happen. People are raw. But in these mild or more moderate cases, both parents maintain contact with their children. As Karen Woodall said in her book, Understanding Parental Alienation, Learning to Cope, Helping to Heal, parental alienation is not about contact disputes. It is about the exercise of power by one parent over the other, using the child as a conduit for control. Parental alienation is not about conflict between two parents, even though it may look like that from the outside to the naive or unaware professional. It is about the actions of one parent, often an unwell parent, who is causing the child to reject the other parent, which causes the rejected parent to feel upset, hurt, unheard, and often angry that help is not available. Parental alienation is not about parents acting badly. It is about one parent acting badly, and the other being drawn into a desperate struggle to save their relationship with their child. Parental alienation is child abuse, and like all child abuse, it is harmful to the child not to intervene and stop it and punish the perpetrator, especially if that person will not stop it and cannot show insight into what they have done. By incorporating the study of parental alienation and its diagnostic indicators within the 7-hour course on child abuse, you will finally be enabling therapists to protect alienated children from those parents who are incapable of stopping themselves. There is now empirical evidence that parental alienation exists in at least 36 different countries, including Brazil, where it is illegal. On February 12th of this year, the Daily Telegraph in London, England, published an interview with Anthony Douglas, the chief executive of CAFCAS, the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service, who openly condemned parental alienation. In the interview, he said, "Parents who try to alienate their children from their ex-partners are committing a form of child abuse." In Mexico, the federal legislature recently established its illegality with the following statement: "The family member that transforms the consciousness of a child in order to prevent, hinder, or destroy its links with one of their parents will be suspended in the exercise of parental rights of the child. Also, If the alienating parent has custody of the child, this will go immediately to the other parent. Why are we lagging behind? One of the myths surrounding parental alienation is that removing the child from the alienating parent will harm the child. But let me stress that this is not at all a child custody issue. This is a child protection issue. If a parent is abusing their child, then it is of paramount importance that the child be removed from that parent forthwith and placed in the care of the targeted, emotionally available parent. Nick Child, in the paper I sent you, framed it succinctly. He said, "There is a natural aversion to the most drastic step that courts can take, reversing custody. In fact, evidence shows that when properly assessed and skillfully executed, children quickly get over their alienation and soon show clear benefits from the new family arrangements. If that is so, then maybe we should be keener to do it sooner in some cases. A change like that includes the expectation that the new residential parent can support a better relationship with both parents. A danger for the child when custody is transferred is that the previously favored parent may give up and cut off, so the child still has only one relationship with a loved parent. But at least it is the healthier one. Right now, children all over the country are being coerced into hating a parent they secretly love. According to the National Parents Organization, the damage this is causing to those children is incalculable. The most common symptoms of parental alienation in young children are unusual distress during transitions from one parent to the other, sleep disturbances, regression in achievement of regulation of bodily functions, and failure to achieve expected levels of impulse control. In elementary school-age children, disorganization, inability to attend schoolwork with resultant lowered grades, social isolation, and moodiness often occur. Teenagers often emancipate prematurely from adult control, becoming defiant and rigid. Such emancipation sometimes includes school refusal, with or without the permission of the parent. Alienated children of all ages show more problems with impulse control than normal, and many children show less ability to be considerate of the feelings of others, except when they accommodate a chosen parent, than normal for the child's age. Dr. Amy Baker, in her letter to you, directly addressed what could happen if therapists do not receive training in parental alienation. She said, "Because parental alienation is a form of emotional abuse, this has been established in several research studies published in peer-reviewed journals. And because mental health professionals are mandated reporters of all forms of child maltreatment, it is essential that they receive training on parental alienation. Moreover, several aspects of diagnosing and treating parental alienation are counterintuitive and require specialized expert knowledge. Therefore, it is extremely important that professionals who meet with families affected by parental alienation do not make diagnostic and treatment decisions based on non-PA knowledge. Doing so is highly likely to result in misguided and erroneous decisions and could in fact further contribute to a child losing a relationship with a loving parent." What happens to that loving parent when they lose their child, but their child is still alive? Many cannot cope. Some commit suicide. Others lose their money and even their homes, trying for years to get their child back. Most fail because they are battling an unseen enemy, a parent who hides behind their child and claims it is what the child wants. And so the targeted parent spends years searching online for spectral images of their child growing up, or salvaging fragments of other people's conversations after they visited with their child who may live down the road or around the corner, living parallel lives once joined together by a love now needlessly and viciously torn apart, leaving them suffering from the aching knowledge that what has happened to their child is absurd and crushingly unfair, with no one willing to listen, understand, or help. Just a helpless shrug of the shoulders and the abhorrent suggestion that the parent move on. To where? How? No. It is the never-ending crime that no one so far has been able to solve. In conclusion, I would like to read you a statement written by my daughter, Amy. While living with her mother, Amy began cutting herself because she did not understand why she was not allowed to love her father. When her mother found out, she told Amy not to worry about it and that it would go away. When Amy eventually told her mother that she wanted to kill herself, her mother replied, "Well, do it at your father's house. That way he can be seen as the bad parent." Amy continued to struggle and eventually found the strength to ask me if she could move in with me. On the night before she appeared in court, Amy wrote the following statement, which she has given me permission to share with you. "I lived with a severely mentally ill person. I went through depression. I went through self-harm because of the difficulty of understanding how wrong the situation was. I went through suicidal thoughts because I didn't think there was a way out. I went through the mental, emotional, and sometimes physical abuse. I went through the alienation, the severe mood swings from my mom, the surviving, and now I get to live and breathe and blossom and get the grades in school I deserve because I found my way through this, and I can find my way through some math problem or essay because I'm not about to let myself down the way my mom has let me and herself and her family down. I refuse to let myself wallow in the circumstances in which I have grown this strong and finally happy. We cannot allow this inertia to continue any longer. By agreeing to my request, you are letting parents all over the state, all over the country, know that California is going to be the first state in the union to protect its children from this terrible scourge, and that hopefully, because of your courage, more states will follow your lead and work to protect their children from parental alienation too. Please, for the sake of the children and their targeted parents, and to clear away all misunderstandings about what parental alienation is and what it is not, I implore you to incorporate the study of parental alienation and its diagnostic indicators into the 7-hour course on child abuse without delay. Thank you.
Are there any board members that have any questions? Mr. Rookles?
Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. One piece I just wanted to kind of move out of the way is we don't approve the content of the continuing education, so
I understand that.
yeah, so you'll want to go to NBCC and APA and ask them to offer those. So that's something that's separate from us. I'm also a counselor educator and conscientious of making sure that when we're teaching students that everything that we're teaching really applies. And this is such an important issue, but I'm not sure that our providers are the ones that are going to figure out that this is going on. So reading through your very dense materials, there was a lot there, and I really appreciated that because it helped educate me. If the enmeshed parent is bringing the child in, the therapist can't start questioning that person. They have to join with that client's perspective, and we're not going to be able to get objective information from just that parent's point of view, right? Because they're going to, if there's tension in their divorce relationship, they're going to demonize the other person, which is sort of normal. If the child is the one that comes into therapy, your materials here are pretty clear about saying that the child will not even bring it up or talk about it. It doesn't tend to be part of the content of what the child brings so that the therapist could identify it and make the report. And then, of course, the estranged parent is the one who may be coming into therapy. But the challenge with the estranged parent is that we don't have the power to necessarily make that change. They could call CPS as well. So, and then the other final piece that I want to make is that many of the references that you gave us talked about the importance of the person being fully trained in this area and not just exposed to the content in order to be able to work thoroughly in this area, right? Because it could go in the other direction that you start making a report of someone who shouldn't be involved. So I'm just having a difficulty applying this into the child abuse curriculum when I don't see how the therapist is going to discover it.
Well, let me try and remember all your points. When families come in to therapy, quite often it's court required, you'll get the alienating parent who will present as calm and justified in everything they're doing, and the children will disparage the other parent, especially when they're in the presence of the alienating parent. I also want to make a distinction. You said the estranged parent. It's not estrangement. It's alienation. There's a difference.
Sorry,
I'm sure you know that. I'm sure you're
Sorry,
aware
I
of
was
that.
using the language from the articles that you gave me. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
there is a discussion about estrangement in there, but what we're talking about is alienation.
Alienation.
Estrangement is
Yes.
sort of
Different.
different.
Yes.
Yes, so there are reasons for estrangement on both sides, but alienation has to do with the enmeshment with the child and the alienating parent, so that their thoughts are basically taken from them, and they are left as the mouthpiece for the alienating parent. So they will present as being entirely disparaging of the alienated or targeted parent. When the other parent come in, the targeted parent will come in, they will present as upset, angry, hurt, because they're trying to salvage their relationship with their child. And for the most part, when these happened originally, that alienated or targeted parent won't know what's happening to them. They'll just be casting around in the dark trying to figure out why has their children all of a sudden turned against them. And that's what the trained therapist should be looking out for. Certain diagnostic indicators, especially a child disparaging entirely a parent who, for the most part, is blameless and who's serving as a conduit for the other parent's rage.
Yeah.
As far as treating them in the subspecialty, you just want right now somebody who will recognize the diagnostic indicators and report it as abuse to the CPS. Once the CPS has it, they would hopefully remove the children from the alienating parent and place them with the targeted parent, at which point therapy would begin. And that would have to happen with a subspecialty in family dynamics with somebody trained in parental alienation.
So one piece that I've noticed in the clinical work that my students do across all the agencies is the when there's supervised contact with a parent that happens within an agency, that's not by one of our therapists. It's by a bachelor's level social worker that manages that process. And then if they get referred to therapy, then again, you're talking about the expert. She works in mental health, so in those type of agencies. I don't know if that's.
Can
if you
I
could speak.
also answer
Yeah.
that question, please? I pulled up the child abuse 7-hour text-based course.
Yes.
And in it says that one, identify and clinically assess for the 4 types of child abuse: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. Utilize appropriate methods and skills for counseling children. And I'm sure you all know what they are. And also in the 4th one, it says demonstrate knowledge about treatment issues and specialized interventions for specific interpersonal blah, blah, blah. So it is actually in the child abuse curriculum, because I myself am a therapist, and a number of years ago I saw a woman and her 6 children, and there was a MFC who was doing the custody evaluation, and he recommended that the father get the children, and the father was unemployed, working in his backyard, said he was agoraphobic, and was living in a gang-infested area. And this custody evaluator ruled for him to be the custody parent.
Yes, it should be in forensics for certain.
Yes.
Yes,
And
in
so
forensic.
I tried, without knowing about parent alienation at that time, I knew there was something really wrong, but I couldn't tell what. And she brought the children in, and they all apologized to her and said, "We're so sorry, Mom, there's nothing we can do. This is the way it is, And I asked them, well, do you have something against your mom? No, not one of them did. But they went and chose to live with their dad. So right now the situation is that these children are choosing to live with their parents, and they're like 8 years old, and they get the choice in court to live with one parent or another. And the parent that they choose is the parent who has been coercing them and bad-mouthing the other parent. And the other parent is a perfectly good parent, but has no say in the matter. I think that it just would behoove therapists to be able to recognize this issue and give adequate treatment, because I know I didn't give adequate treatment at that time. If I'd known what I was doing, I would definitely have handled it in a whole different way. And I've tried to contact her, since then to tell her that, and she has not been amenable to it. 6 children from 4 to 20, and she never sees them. Can you imagine the pain?
We just don't want it pushed down the road anymore.
I appreciate it. I think that you would get more effectiveness working in the child welfare system who is dealing with this, which aren't necessarily the ground level people are not master's level individuals.
There's still the fact that parents go to therapists to be healed. Families get sent
do.
to therapists to be
Yes.
healed, either on
But
their
this is in
own or
this.
required by the court. And when they're in there, the therapists do not know it, don't recognize. I mean, we're talking about Jerry Grossman, who I'm sure some of you have heard of before. When I first met him and I mentioned parental alienation to him, he had to look it up on his cell phone. Now it's 2 or 3 years later, and he's written that letter to you. So he learned. He got it. And I believe he's just been awarded the Educator of the Year by the AAMFTCA. So it's that important that he's willing to write that letter, that this should be for the trainee therapists and for therapists already practicing to at least recognize it.
Yeah, I think it's for therapists at our level to really be very well trained in recognizing and treating it. Because I have worked with the AFCC, is that the therapists with the DPS? And we do have someone who's a theoretical clinician, and he is going to go and present at the AFCC conference in May in Boston. I do know also that the DPS workers are very much against this. Oh, yeah, they are very much against the whole idea of parent alienation. So,
Christina?
Christine first. She raised her hand first. I was just going to say, it sounds like there is a lack of knowledge, and it sounds like should be addressed. I'm not sure what we can do, but maybe some of the practitioners can offer something. What can be done? What is within our jurisdiction? What can we do?
can I answer that?
I'd like to hear from the board members first, and then,
Okay.
yeah.
So, this is such a new idea. I really have fun, reading the material. I think it's a very important concept, and yet it's also very new. So, so in my thinking, the very important thing is that we have to establish this as one of the form of, emotional abuse / domestic violence. And, and so I think that this is a very important criteria that you have to establish first. And then you talk about the treatment and the training and whatnot. And so I'm thinking that, for child welfare, for CPS, they operate, on reporting, even for investigation based on their own legislation. So I'm wondering, maybe the way to go first is really to help maybe enrich or expand the definition of an emotional abuse and domestic violence. And then you can start talking about how we can, as, mental health, licensing board, to help advocate for that idea. Otherwise you're not going to go anywhere without the legislation. So, so it is definitely something that, not that I see every day, but I can easily imagine, say, like when you're treatment-wise, you deal with a person who have borderline personality disorder. You have that sort of triangulation. I can totally see it, but at the same time, it's like when you were saying the example, even for board members, we have the group of licensees here. We're kind of like, I'm not sure if we can even grasp the concept. So I would say that to begin with, maybe we can look at, I hear the urgency, but it really seems like we need to take some time, to see how we can proceed, for one. And for two, another feedback is, I'm not sure how specific in our course content, the required course content. So, so I'm glad you read a little bit, about, what is written, in our jurisdiction. So I'm not sure if we are the right person yet, to push that idea and how much we can specifically, require that to learn this particular theory.
Well, first of all, I want to say you really get it. Yeah, you got it. And because a lot of people don't, and I think you just spoke so succinctly about it all. And I think you're absolutely right that these definitions need to be changed. And Ron and I were talking about it with Kim, and I know that you guys were leaders in getting treatment for transgender people. Is that correct?
No, we were actually responding to an introduction of a bill to ban reparative therapy to minors. So
Okay.
that was introduced independently by the author, but it's something we looked at as a board, whether to support that bill or not.
Well, when we talk to it, people say, go to the BBS, they'll help.
To follow up on what Kim just said, and at the direction of council, that perhaps legislation, someone to carry your bill, and then it comes back to us for support, just as even though it may look like it came from us, it did not come from us. It's legislation, and then they go around and look for support to support your legislation, and then that's the way you could get something rolled out that was absolutely, it would be done.
It's a bit like a bouncy castle, okay? I've been working on this for a long time, and you hit a wall and you bounce off. You hit another wall and you bounce off. And if you see an open door and it looks like somebody can finally do something about it, you walk through that door. I've been in touch with 2 legislators so far. It's not the right time of the year. We have a lot on our plate. The legislation's already written. It's going to take some time. Everybody has an excuse. Respectfully, everybody has an excuse for not doing anything about it. In the meantime, the children are being torn apart. And so my goal is to just get somebody to do something for the children. I understand about the legislation. I understand about the other organizations to which you were referring. But I have also been told that this is the right place for me to be as well. I've been told by members of organizations who are in this room that this is the right place for me to be. I'm hoping that's the case. I will go elsewhere and come back to you if needs be. But yes.
Why can't we talk about introducing some legislation?
Or finding someone
Not
that
today.
will-
I know it's not agendized. I know that's.
Or finding
next-
someone to support, to run for us, is what you're saying. So, that said, yes, we can, because we do sponsor our own legislation. We can sponsor whatever it is the board wants to sponsor. So we're not running into barriers that way. If it was the board's desire to do something like this, I would ask us to approach it much like we approach every other piece of legislation. Get some research, get some information, make a determination whether it's appropriate for the board to sponsor that particular piece of legislation or not.
My experience with parent alienation in hearing that word and that phrase has always been in the context of high conflict custody evaluations. I am quite aware that in that arena, when you have a 730 evaluator, and to be one of those evaluators, you are required to hold a license from our board or the Board of Psychology. There are specific rules prescribed by the court for training and education. And so to me, that if we are thinking about moving in this direction, I'd like to invite those experts in and hear what they have to say. I mean, what are they educated on? What are they seeing? If we're looking at just mediators trying to decide, what percentage of time the child spends with mom or dad and who has the holidays, the mediator issue we can't touch because those individuals are not required to be a licensee of the board. So, if this is a topic that the board would like us to look at, I think we're certainly able to do that. But again, I would caution that we do it with the same approach that we do everything else.
That's fine, but let's just do something. At least talk about it more,
Can I just say that my experience with the court custody people is that they are biased?
And I would say that might not be an incorrect perception. So to assist, parents caught in that situation, a few years ago, we sponsored legislation to allow us access legally to the 730 evaluation report. And so what happens now that we have that legal access is that we can look at those reports, we can do our investigation, we can send the investigation package to a subject matter expert who has expertise as a 730 evaluator, and those experts opine whether or not that report was prepared in the manner that it should be, which is unbiased and very neutral. I can tell you that since that has occurred, that legal option has occurred, then we have had some licensees where we have determined that they didn't do what they were supposed to do. So we can discipline the licensee, but we can't always affect and nor should we affect the outcome of the court decision because that is separate from what we do. So yes.
But they can certainly improve what they
Absolutely.
write if they know this.
And, I think you make a good argument. I think the question then becomes, is that the board's purview, or is that something that should come from the court? I mean, that just begs the question. Okay, Christina?
Go ahead.
So let me just reframe, let me just remind the board, what my understanding of you guys' request, is to include that include parent alienation in the 7 hours child abuse course.
Right.
So,
Can
so I think we can talk about the theoretical basis and its application about everything, but that's really what you want to,
course.
want us to discuss.
And let me-
So it's pretty specific.
Let me just point out, we're talking about parental alienation as opposed to alienating behaviors or parental alienation syndrome, which really doesn't hold water anywhere. The word syndrome should never be brought up. It will bring in all kinds of conflict and complexities. This is simply about parental alienation. In other words, what happens to the child. That's what I'm talking about. There are alienating behaviors, there's all kinds of other things, but I'm here to protect the children. That's why I'm talking about parental alienation. That's what we need help with.
Okay, so I'm going to call, I'm sorry, Betty?
I just, as someone who's taught those courses, and also someone who works very closely in the school system with, one of the concerns that I have, and I'm not in any way dismissing or not acknowledging the validity of what you're saying, but what I can tell you from a very personal experience in many, many years of working with the CPS system is that while we absolutely teach the requirement to report emotional abuse, and I'm looking at Christina, who works very closely with the same system. What I can tell you is that very, very seldom are there any actions on the part of CPS on an emotional abuse case.
They've not been trained to recognize it.
Well, and I think that speaks back to the question that that Kim has brought up, that Christine was bringing up, which is, where can you get the traction that you need? And honestly, from my perspective, you're not going to get much traction by even including it as something that professionals are looking for in the context of a therapeutic relationship, or, I mean, because just reporting that this is happening is not going to result in any significant change.
I understand that. And if it's reported to the CPS and the children would be removed from the abusive parent, then we would have to have a whole new subspecialty in family dynamics specializing in parental alienation. Specialists would be required to treat those children. You know, with my daughter, when I got custody of my daughter, I downloaded the entire list of therapists in my area, and I'm in Rancho Cucamonga, okay? And there's lots of them. And I called every single one of them, and I asked them, do you know about parental alienation? Do you know? And I didn't go to anybody until I found somebody, and there was maybe 2 who knew about it. And that's who my daughter's seeing, and that's made a huge difference. So if you have a specialist in parental alienation, somebody who actually knows about it, your child is going to heal.
If I might, I think we've heard, I mean, there's nobody here that's, I can honestly say that doesn't feel and not concerned about this. But the request you have asked for on our agenda, I would like to either have the executive officer or our counsel give us, the board, what our options are within the legal purview of the request that is on our agenda.
Okay, so my recommendation, yeah, the option here is pretty much what I stated before. If it is the board's desire to look at this topic a little bit further, I would like it to be in the same context that we have done everything else. Gather the data, look at the research, bring people in to share and talk with us so that we are able to make a fully informed decision. I think Mr. Berglass has brought up what I would frame as an emerging issue. So we're supposed to respond to those things, and how we respond to it, I think it needs to be done in a very thoughtful manner in order for whatever decision is made is meaningful. So at that point, I would suggest that, you could kick it back to staff, do a little more research, and we can bring back, and we can start talking about it at later board meetings in terms of what our findings are.
Okay, Peter?
Yeah, I would like to request the chair direct the executive officer to do just that.
Any other discussion? Have any?
I wanted to ask one question. Is there anyone here from CAMFT or AMFT?
Yes.
I think that they are good at, bringing forth legislation, aren't they? They could maybe work on
But I
that
think
too.
that's the grander conversation we want to have, is with everybody.
Right, right. And legislation, as I explained to you earlier, it really, they like it when you can bring to them a proposal that, where you have all the kinks worked out first. Walking in right now with just this, without any kind of research data, we wouldn't even get an author. Yeah, so if you want it to be meaningful and something successful down the road, then it's a longer process, but it's necessary.
Okay.
Ron and I would be willing to be available.
Okay.
Do you have cards you could leave the staff?
I know how to get in touch,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. How about 5 minutes? Okay. If I can read this correctly. 2:40. We'll be back. Let's see if I can read my watch. 2:44. Did I get that right? 2:43-ish. And so we're back and come to order. We still have a quorum. 2, 3.
No. We're short one now. But we're done voting.
Okay. So all information from now here on out is informational only.
Right.
Okay. So the next is the discussion and no possible action on neurocognitive degenerative disorders. Kim?
Okay. So at the end of December, I received an email from Dr. Stephen Frankel proposing to provide a retirement with dignity option to licensees who are already in the disciplinary process. And his rationale for that proposal is that sometimes we get complaints on interesting behavior on the part of a licensee, and the investigation reveals that there is that a violation of the law has occurred, but primarily it probably occurred because the licensee is a little bit impaired or is suffering from some cognitive disorder such as dementia. Mr. Frankel was not able to be here today, and so with his approval, I'm presenting his email and request to you. Primarily what Mr. Frankel is looking for is sort of a retirement, to add the retirement option as an option in a disciplinary term. If that licensee who is the subject of the accusation and the violation of the law can provide documentation that substantiates that that individual is suffering from a cognitive disorder. So he provided a lot of information for you, a letter to the Board of Psychology where he's made this request. He even provided a copy of a disciplinary order where this was the situation. And so what I want to talk to you about today is give you a little background on our retirement license history and how that came about, and then a little food for thought to consider. So during the January 2010 board meeting, the board actually discussed proposing to add a retired status to its license category. Prior to that, licensees in practice had two options. You could be active, so you renewed every 2 years with $140, or you could be inactive. Many folks did not want to have their license canceled because when you looked it up on the website, it has sort of a negative connotation, and we had heard from stakeholders or licensees in particular that they wanted to have that option. Primarily offering them that option gave them the ability to sort of honor their years of service to the profession, and it seemed to be a little more prestigious than inactive or just totally canceled. So it was a respectful way for someone to end their career. So as a result of that discussion, we ran we sponsored some legislation, and it was authored by the Assembly Member Emerson at that time, and was subsequently signed by the governor. And we had added the retired license category effective January 1st, 2011. So that's what it's for. And under the current terms of the law, basically a licensee can request to retire their license, provided that there's no pending action against them, their license is active and good standing at this point, or even inactive, but it's a good standing license. There's nothing going on with it. And so for yes.
Since the board has lost its quorum, all the remaining items cannot be discussed. Only you can provide the information, Kim, but no comments can be made by board members, and of course, no action can be taken.
Okay.
Or questions?
have to sit here and listen to staff.
You have to listen to me. Oh, my gosh. Okay, so anyway, the process to get a retired license is a $40 application fee, submit the form, and you can have a retired license if your license is currently in good standing. If we were to consider, some things to consider when we next discuss this at a subsequent board meeting, we need to think about what that would look like. So what, under Mr. Frankel's proposal is the accusation has already been served. And it's already out there. It alleges the violations of law. And so during the settlement process, we would then offer, if we thought it was appropriate, and there was some proof to substantiate that there is a cognitive impairment, we could consider this retirement with dignity license. Things to think about, when we first introduced the concept of a retired license, the intent was to give that licensee an option if they no longer wish to practice. Sort of, I'm kind of like we retire from state service. I'm done. Thank you very much. It's been great. I'd like to go off into the sunset. That intent is very different than the disciplinary process. The disciplinary process it entails an investigation. We want to fact find to determine if a violation of law has occurred or not. And if we substantiate a violation of law, then we have to determine the next appropriate action. So it may be a citation and fine, or we may need formal discipline. And once the action's initiated, we have to follow what's specified in the administrative procedure right. So under that particular act, it's carefully constructed to ensure that we follow specific procedures and that licensees' rights are also protected. So you get all those due process rights under that law. So when we look at what we are set up to do, we are a state regulatory agency. Our mandate is consumer protection primarily. And so one of the ways that we protect consumers is the publication of all these actions on our website. Once an accusation is filed and once the matter is decided and final. Additionally, part of what we are required to do under federal law is to report discipline to the National Practitioners Data Bank. So that affords everybody outside of California the opportunity to view any action that has occurred in California, but maybe that licensee wants to work or apply for licensure in another state. So if the board were to adopt Mr. Frankel's suggestion and offer a retired license to a licensee who is subject to an accusation, we might be perceived as non-compliant with our consumer protection mandate. And one specific situation I'd like you to consider is that many years ago, some healing arts boards used a loosely constructed practice for an impaired practitioner. If the investigation revealed that the practitioner was impaired, under specific situations, that practitioner was afforded the opportunity to go into a recovery program in lieu of formal discipline. This particular situation is not reported on the website. People don't know that the practitioner's in a recovery program. And it was, and it's never, if the practitioner successfully completed the rehabilitation program, then that action never got noticed on publicly. So it was sort of construed as those boards might be protecting their licensees. And it was some of that lack of transparency that led to the legislation that we now refer to as 1441 Uniform Standards and the requirement to be more transparent about what is occurring with our licensees. So that is something I would encourage all of you to strongly consider and think about, as well as and balance that with the request from Mr. Frankel, and we can have a discussion later.
Okay, on advice from our council, since we lack a quorum, this meeting is over. Any other items that are left on the agenda will have to be moved to the May meeting if, in fact, they need to be discussed. Thank you for coming, and we will see you in May.
And let me just say that the reason I advised the chair to basically say that the meeting is over is because to just sit here and listen and not be able to comment or provide feedback, the public wouldn't be able to comment on it. It's just useless to sit here through this process.
And we do have to do it again
Yeah.
for you to have any kind of comment on it. Okay. Keep smiling. Keep smiling.